last days of summer are coming on fast. Was hoping August wouldn't end, but it never lasts.
I read recently that the Boston Globe, I think it's on your website, that the Boston Globe, and I will quote here, said that Lucy Kaplansky is becoming the troubadour laureate of modern folk. And I have to really agree with that, simply because, well, you've done just about everything in this field. Now, the word modern folk, I think that's a really good depiction of what the kind of music that you play. Because when people think of folk music, they think, I know I have thought of Pete Seeger, the Kingston Trio, these kinds of people. That's more folky, and the kind of music you play isn't strictly folk music. Modern folk might be a good definition. I know they say Americana, what have you, but I think that's a pretty good evaluation of exactly the kinds of music that you yourself play. So, with that, I do want to say that Lucy has a brand new album out. It's titled Last Days of Summer. And like many of her other albums and her writing, it's centered around family, around people in New York City and the things that are happening, taxi drivers, what have you. Lucy's songs they hit home and they hit the heart really well. And this album is one of those albums. I always hesitate to say, oh, this is her best album. But gosh, it's real close to it, believe me. Maybe maturity has done that. But let's jump back. Give folks a little bit of your background. You grew up in Chicago, and your dad was a noted mathematician, college professor, but you moved away when you were 18 years old and came to New York City. What were your feelings then? Why did you come to New York City?
Well, I mean, I met a guy. That's what happened. I was still in high school, and I met him. He was 5 years older than me, and we started singing together. And there was a big article in the New York Times in 1980 about a folk revival in Greenwich Village, and we thought, probably he thought, and I went along with it. Oh, we got to go to New York to do this. So that's why we went to New York.
And were you singing? I mean, at that point, did you have a guitar, and were you playing the guitar and writing songs or not?
I wasn't writing songs. I mean, I'd literally written like a couple of songs when I was like 14. Really? He was writing songs, and I was a singer. And yes, I was playing guitar. So we were a duo. And then I ended up breaking up with him a couple of years later. Oh, well, actually, sorry. I'm sorry, the article was 1978, and I broke up with him in 1980. That's what it was. And then I started doing the whole folk scene by myself with other people's songs, people from the scene, like Cliff Eberhardt and Robin Bateau and people like that.
Robin Bateau. I've seen him and David Buskin many times in New York City when I was younger. And then you got involved in this folk scene, and you were singing. Name some of the people that you were associating with back then.
Well, I met Sean Colvin and Suzanne Vega right around the same time, 1980. Suzanne and I were actually both students at Barnard College, and that's where we met. And I invited her down to the village, to the folk scene, and Sean showed up. And Cliff Eberhardt introduced her to me. So there were those two, Jack Hardy, Rod McDonald, a lot of very talented people, David Massengill, Steve Forbert, a lot of very talented people were hanging out there. Suzanne and Sean were the ones who really kind of exploded out of there.
Really? Yeah.
Didn't quite happen for other people. Well, Steve Forbert did too.
And of course, the fact that you also introduced Suzanne Vega to the scene,
Yeah.
and Suzanne exploded also. So you had a lot of influence on many, many folk singers. But then all of a sudden, you decide that you want to do something different.
Yeah.
And tell me about this whole scene.
Yeah. So I was 23, 1983, and it's a long story. I'm going to make it very short. I decided I didn't want to be a singer anymore. I was going to go back to school. I went to NYU. It took me years to figure out that I was actually running away from the thing I really wanted to do, which was to sing. I went back to school, became a psychologist, clinical psychologist. So I'm actually Dr. Kaplansky. And then I did that for about 5 years and then realized, with actually the help of a really good therapist, that I wanted to sing. So I went back to singing.
This is absolutely amazing.
It's a kind of a wacky story.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that you gave up clinical psychology, you were working at NYU hospital, or
Let's see, where was I? St. Luke's, at Bellevue, different places. Yeah.
so Dr. Kaplansky decides then to give up this psychology thing
Yeah.
and get back into what she really, really loves. At the time, you had to love the psychology, or you would have never. I mean, who goes for a PhD and gets a PhD and doesn't enjoy doing that? Because, I know for my own self, I was pursuing a PhD, and as I got toward the end of it, I said, why am I doing this? I can't, it's just too much work. But you did it. And at the same time, you did it for a number of years before you decided to go back to the thing you really love. Were there perks there that you had to throw away? Working at the hospitals?
I mean,
Like
other than,
retirement income or...
well, I mean, a steady paycheck. Yeah. But I mean, it didn't take, once I quit and started doing music full time, it only was a couple years really till I started to make money singing. And then I ended up making way more money than I would have ever made as a psychologist, which I didn't know. I didn't know that was going to happen.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say, I mean, I felt badly leaving patients for sure, but it wasn't, I still, to this day, I love talking about psychopathology and trying to understand people, and sort of what makes them tick. I love that. I talk about it all the time, think about it all the time, but to be a clinician was not my passion, and my passion had always been music, and I was just lying to myself.
Well, it goes without saying that the experience as a psychologist had to have an effect on the songs that you've written. How much of an influence do you feel that has?
The way I always look at that is it influenced my training, influenced everything about the way I think and look at the world. So, writing is part of that. Writing is, I guess, a way of kind of looking at things and trying to express it in an interesting way. So it couldn't help but have been influenced. I mean, I don't really see a direct line, but it's got to be there because it affected me as a whole.
Right. Did you ever want to go back to being a psychologist full time again?
No, you know what? And I never have wanted to. Like, I pretty much right away knew this is the right decision. Like, it was never the thing I really wanted. No, so I don't. I think one way or another I'll just be singing for the rest of my life until maybe someday I retire. But I don't know when
Well,
that'll be.
and I don't see any reason why you shouldn't.
Right.
You've kind of reached the pinnacle of success in this career, and you've sung with some of the biggest names in folk music. In addition to your non-solo albums, you've done albums with Dar Williams and Richard Shindell, and that of course was the Cry 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 album, and the Red Horse with Eliza Gilkison and John Gorka, right? And you've sung with all of them. As a matter of fact, John Gorka and Richard Shindell do harmony on two of the songs on this brand new album. And as I said at the beginning, this album takes you through a wealth of emotions, and it begins with the title track, Last Days of Summer, which really is something that all parents can relate to when their kid leaves home and goes off to school, to college. Tell me about some of the feelings that you had when that happened.
Well, I mean, I was excited for her and proud of her. She got to go. She was going to her first choice college, NYU. But at the same time, I was incredible. I was so sad. And I actually, in retrospect, I had been dreading it for years, literally years, the idea that she was going to leave home. So the leading up to it, the couple of months before, that's when the song got written. And I was just so sad and so filled with dread. And then ironically, it was like a couple of days after she left, I felt fine. It was like, oh, okay, this is okay. I think the dread was probably the worst part. But so in other words, I guess my point is that it was a very bittersweet thing, which I think it is for every parent. I think that's part of what comes across in the song. Like you're joyful for your child, and you're also so sad, and it's the end of something in your life. And that's a tough thing to go through.
Yeah.
And it's kind of universal. I mean, it's what happens if things go well. Your kid leaves. That's what you want.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. And of course, as we spoke about before, your daughter isn't really that far away from where you live.
No.
But at the same time, it's important for children to go out on their own and do something, even though they're that close,
Yeah.
It's good that they're doing their own thing. And I'm sure your daughter is doing her own thing right now and enjoying it.
Yeah, she is.
I spoke at the beginning about the classification of the music, but how do you classify your music?
I don't know. Classifications often I don't think are that helpful because I think so much music crosses genres. I mean, what is, if you say singer-songwriter, I mean, a lot of people are singer-songwriters, and Ed Sheeran is a singer-songwriter, but you'd call him pop. But
yeah, exactly.
Steve Earle is a singer-songwriter. He's not a folk. He is a folk singer. He's also like alt country. He's rock.
Exactly.
So I think I've felt for a long time that those categories often are just used for marketing purposes by like stores and record companies, and I'm not sure they tell you that much. So like if somebody asks me what kind of music do you play, I say, well, if I tell you folk music, you'll get the idea, but it's not really folk music.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I would say it's my music mixture of folk, pop, country, alt country, rock. It's like it goes all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I often think about changing the title of my program, my radio program, my podcast, from mostly folk to something different because, mostly folk, and it really is mostly folk, I think, but it isn't all folk, and it's, some rock, some folk rock, some bluegrass, a little bit, like you say, a little bit of everything. And that's what you're going to find when you get hold of Lucy's brand new album, Last Days of Summer. Now, the great thing about this, and again, we've spoken about this before, is that you're producing this album by yourself. And for the folks who want to get the album, they have to get it through you alone. And I personally think that's a fantastic thing.
Thank you.
Simply because these music services like Spotify, what have you, they give the artists just about nothing for
Yeah.
their work.
It is
And
just about nothing.
I always congratulate anybody that is doing that by themselves. But at the same time, you're an established artist. People know Lucy Kaplansky. They might not know an up and coming artist. How do they do it? How do they get by?
I don't know. That's a really good question. I mean, I couldn't possibly pull this off if I didn't have an audience already. I'm selling it to my audience.
Exactly.
I don't know, things are different than, when I started 27 years ago, there was so much more radio play for people like me, and so much more press available than there is now. But then there wasn't the internet and there wasn't YouTube. So I don't actually know. I don't have an answer for that. I don't know how people who are starting out now do it. I think it's probably a lot tougher.
I have a folk music friend. I don't know if you know her, but her name is Kat Goldman. And Kat is just an incredibly great singer-songwriter. Dar Williams covered one of her songs, Weight of the World. And Kat recently wrote a book. I actually wrote the foreword to the book. But it's a book about the process that a folk singer in quotes, goes through and what they have to do in order to get there. And it's not a positive outlook. And, basically Kat summarizes it all by saying, don't do it. It's incredibly hard. And, I try to tell new artists, if I'm interviewing them, to read this book. Not because Kat says don't go there, because they might be quite good, but because the book evaluates all of the pitfalls that you're going to meet on the way and what you might do to prevent some of the bad things that might happen to you.
Yeah, that sounds helpful.
Yeah, so it is a difficult world for the type of music that we both love. Any kind of advice that you would give to young singers today, aside from don't do it?
What I usually say is try to do a lot of shows, try to open for people you think are good, who might, and go to clubs and ask if you can open, because you get, well, for one, just as a performer, the only way you learn to perform is by doing it, and you get better and better and better. And then I guess the other thing I've said is, if you're really good, people will notice you. Mm-hmm. And people will talk about you. Now, I don't know how it works now, but that's the way it seems to work. Like, if you're good, you're gonna find out that people think you're really good, and it takes a long time. Yeah. And if you really want to do it, you got to stick with it for a while. That's the best advice I have. It takes
incredible dedication.
It does.
There's just no way around it.
Yeah.
Once again, I'm speaking with Lucy Kaplansky, who has a new album out titled Last Days of Summer. The album covers so many different scenarios, not only in the city, but well, let's put it this way. The final song on the album, I've told you this over and over again, I can't listen to that song without not only tearing up, but almost bursting out in tears and crying when I hear the ending of that song and the story that it tells.
Thank you.
Just real quickly, you were off somewhere in Cape Cod and looking at what was going on in New York City, and the title of
During the
this.
pandemic, during the height
Yes,
of the
this is. I'm
pandemic.
sorry, during
Especially
the
the beginning.
pandemic, right?
Yeah, because that's really key. We escaped. We
Yeah,
live in New York. We escaped.
yeah, and the title of the song is Elmhurst, Queens, Mother's Day. And Elmhurst is kind of where things started breaking loose as far as
Right.
the pandemic goes. And you tell the story from somebody at a distance looking at New York City and what was going on, and especially a nurse in New York City. And that's the part of that song that gets you. When you talk about the nurse, I won't go through the lyrics because I want people to think about buying this album, and you'll get the lyrics when you buy the album. But if you don't walk away from that song without tears in your eyes, then there's really something wrong with you. So I
Thank you.
urge people to go to Lucy's website, lucykaplansky.com, and check it out. You can only get it from Lucy. You won't get it on Spotify or Bandcamp or any of those places. It's the only place that you'll be able to get Lucy's.
And at my shows and at my live
And at her shows, absolutely. That's the other thing, going to her website, check out where she's performing. I know this is a crazy month for you, and I really, really appreciate your giving me this little bit of time
Oh, my pleasure.
to talk. So, check out where she's going to be. Let me ask you one other question. When you write, I know. Oh yeah, I did want to mention the fact that this album is co-written with your husband, Rick Litvin, who also, in his own right, is an incredible artist, videographer, teacher. He also is he presently still teaching at NYU,
In the film school, yeah,
in
professor.
the arts area, and.
Yeah.
So you guys made a good combination, actually. But I wanted to ask you, when you write, what is the writing process for you? Do you need pain in order to write? Because so many singers, they have to really feel in the dumps before feel like they're really in a bad way before they write songs.
No, I mean, I think I have a friend. Oh my God, I'm blanking on his name. Sam. Oh my God, I'm blanking on his last name. Austin singer-songwriter Sam Baker, and
Sam
he
Beck,
said,
oh my God, please.
yeah,
Oh yeah.
he's great. And I remember he was asked that question. And he said something has to move me. So it's not about being down in the dumps or sad. It can be, but it can also just be something that is moving,
Yeah.
and you are impelled to write about it. That's what happens for me. And a lot of the time I don't really know what a song is going to be about, and it kind of makes itself clearer as I go. A lot of unconscious stuff going on, but it's really just it's a craft, and the only way I can do it is I show up. And most of the time, not a lot happens. So I try to do it every day, which doesn't work because I am working too much. But as many days as I can, show up, sit down, go back to what I was working on, and just try again. That's my process.
Thank you so much for that. And I guess we have to cut this interview off, but I certainly want to thank you. Once again, I encourage folks to get Lucy's album. The cover of the album was shown at the beginning of this interview, and the back cover will be shown at the end of this interview with a little clip from the songs on each part just to give you a taste of what this album is about. And Lucy, once again, thank you so much for being with me today on
Thank you.
Catskill Air, and I hope you enjoyed the interview when I send it to you.
I always enjoy talking to you, Artie. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks a million,
Appreciate it.
Lucy. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
When she gets home, won't hug her kids, writes her will like her friends all did, falls asleep in her living room chair again. And it's far away, far from